Oh, from Country Club. The sun rises in the east and sets in the west.
Does
honey.
that mean it's on?
Yeah. Oh, Mel knows how. He's already doing it. Now I sound like a stupid moron. Okay. Okay, we are here with Grandma Bowers, and this is December the 14th, 2007, and she's going to tell us about Grandpa Bowers and her trip to Arizona to go to the temple.
Good. When Ernest and I were married, we lived in Enoch with Ernest's brother Benyon and my sister Velda and their 3 children, Ovida, Selby, and LeKay, for 2 months. Ernest's brother Roy and wife Geneva and daughter Melva Ruth lived in Enoch. Roy was a trader and had traded for a flatbed truck. He got restless and he decided to take the truck and go pick cotton for extra money. Ernest had worked for Benyon, plowing his field and garden with a horse and a plow. That was not needed now. And Ernest and I talked about it, and we decided to go with Roy and his family and pick cotton. We got our things together and took what we thought we would need and left the rest here and there. We didn't own much. We joined Roy and his family and 2 cousins, whose name was Gray. We rode on the back of the truck with the cousins. This was quite an experience for me. I had picked cotton at home when I was growing up and for neighbors to earn money for much needed items, but I had never gone away from home for any kind of work. We were always kept busy at home to help earn our livelihood. Money was scarce then, and money was scarce there. We did quite well when we went to pick cotton. Ernest could really gather it in, and I tried to keep up with him and did pretty well. I always stopped an hour early to help with the cooking. We cooked on a kerosene camp stove, things like fried potatoes, salt pork, eggs, and sometimes dry beans. It was easier to have pork and beans from a can, but it cost quite a bit more. We bought bread or made pancakes, and some of them drank coffee, so we had to make coffee. One night Ernest and I decided to sleep on a trailer load of cotton. The man had pulled it in from the field to take to the gin next morning. He gave us permission to sleep on it. It was softer than the ground. The trailer was made of metal frame covered with mesh wire to hold the cotton. I waked up in the night to find Ernest with a nosebleed. He asked me to get some matches so he could clean the mess of blood out of the cotton. I did as he asked me and struck one on the edge of the trailer. As the match lit, the cotton ignited like gasoline. Flames were all over the top. We were surprised at how fast it had spread. We were trying to get it stopped, so we smothered the flames with the quilt that we had covered with. And with our Heavenly Father's blessings and help, we did put the fire out. We tried to throw off all the black charred cotton. We then laid down again to sleep on this cotton, so that if it started again, we would know it and put the fire out. There, we were blessed again from above. It didn't start again. If it had, we could have been burned badly. I knew cotton was explosive, but this was a real good reminder, and I didn't forget again. We were sure we would have to pay for the cotton that we burned, but the boss said no, he was glad that we had stayed and put the fire out. Some people would have just left and let all of the cotton burn, and the trailer too. He must have really been grateful that we had stayed. The next day, his wife took our dry beans in and cooked them in her big bean pot and on her stove, and they were sure good. We got through there and moved on to the next place. We did this for about 3 weeks. I don't remember how much they paid for picking cotton. It was probably between $1.25 to $2 per hundred. And if we worked hard, Ernest and I could pick between 325 and 400 pounds of cotton a day. You certainly couldn't get rich this way, but you could exist. And we kept working and trying to do our best. When it got near time for school to start, Roy and Geneva said they were going back to Enoch to get Melv Ruth in school. Ernest and I weren't ready to go back. We decided to hitchhike to Mesa, Arizona and go to the temple. We never considered the danger of getting in the car with just anybody that stopped to pick us up. We just wanted to go on, and if Ernest said it was all right, then I knew it was right. So Roy drove us through Dallas and let us out on the roadside. It was the outskirts of Dallas, and our trip began. A trip we would never in this lifetime forget. Our youth kept us from being afraid to travel this way, and our faith kept us going. And I'm sure this was what our main source of protection. Ernest had traveled this road before, and he knew more what it was like. But his family had traveled to the Arizona temple in an old Model T truck when Ernest was 14 years of age. Jim Stark's family had traveled with them in a touring car. They worked as they went along to pay their expenses, mostly picking cotton. It was a rough trip for them, and they got to the temple just before it closed for the holidays in December. Ernest was not afraid to travel this road again, so we started out. I had never been farther from Kelsey than Gilmer or Rosewood. I am amazed at our daring and that we were safe through all of this. I was so naive. We were fortunate to be picked up by a man in a pickup truck shortly after Roy left us on Highway 80. This ride took us all the way to Sweetwater, Texas, where Ernest's Aunt Emma Cody lived. We didn't know exactly where the Codys lived, but Ernest went to some stores and asked them about it. He was told that Uncle Austin would be there very soon at the stores, and he came to pick up food that was spoiled and broken packages for his pigs. So we waited, and he came with his horses and wagon loaded with barrels. He picked up the fruit and vegetables and breads and cakes and packages broken from handling, and we rode up with him on the slop wagon to his house. It really smelled sour, an unforgettable experience. Ernest was glad to see his aunt and uncle and be able to visit with them. And Uncle Austin had planted some feed grains, and they had matured and needed to be picked. So we gathered them for him. He had lots of animals: horses, cows, goats, pigs, sheep, dogs, ducks, and chickens. Not many of each one, but it was interesting. I found this place so different from where we had lived in Texas, where the trees grew tall. All it was mesquite trees and bushes. And I'd never seen mesquites before. Ernest and his female cousin, who was adopted, Marcel, loved to ride the horses out through the mesquites. I had never learned to ride horses, and I hated it because Ernest and Marcel laughed at me, and the mesquites drug me off the horse. But I tried to ride just the same. I was jealous of them anyway because they acted so fond of one another. One day I went out with Ernest. He was going to milk the goat so that we could have milk to make biscuits and gravy. Ernest had milked her several times before. This time there was an old billy goat with her. We paid no attention to him. And Ernest had a little pail full of milk and was nearly through. And the billy goat decided that we were infringing on his rights. He put his head down and started for us. When he came for Ernest, Ernest held the little pail out in front of him, and the goat hit the pail and turned around and came back towards me. And Ernest said, "Run, run, get over that fence." That fence was a six barbed wire fence, 8 inches apart. I couldn't go over it. I couldn't go under it. I couldn't go through it. But I must have gone over it because I ended up on the other side of the fence. I don't know how, but I did. Ernest got over the fence and we went to the house with no milk this morning. And we never went out to milk the goats again. We respected the Billy's rights. Well, we picked cotton for Aunt Emma's neighbor for a few days to get money to go on our journey to the Mesa Temple. We had very little money to go on, but we got on the highway and we're on our way. A truck driver came along and picked us up, and we rode to Pecos, Texas, which was his destination. He said we would probably have trouble getting a ride from this point because a couple had picked up hitchhikers and were killed in the mountains and boulders beyond Pecos. He was right. We stood on that roadside a long time there. Car after car after car passed, and lots of trucks passed, and we stood there. One car stopped, and they said, "We'll take you to Arizona for $10. We only had $5. So they drove on. Their car was already loaded anyway. We couldn't get in it. We might have got on top. It was a long, hot wait, but that was all we could do in this desert. A truck driver finally came along and stopped to let us ride. He wanted companions to keep him awake. We were ready to move on. He was Mexican, but he spoke English, and it was interesting to hear him speak Spanish and accented English. He talked and he sang as we drove along, obviously to stay awake. It was scary sitting beside him, but he treated us all right. He let us out in El Paso. He wouldn't take us across the state line because he could get in trouble for transporting a minor across the state line. When he let us out in El Paso, he told us where to go to get a room in a hotel for the night to be safe, and also where we should not go. He treated us with respect and was very helpful. Our guardian angel was surely watching over us. It was not a high-class hotel, but he said we would be safe there. We trusted him. Our walk to the hotel through the streets was some experience. We could hear people talking, and it was a strange new language to us. They were Mexicans and were speaking Spanish. It was just getting dark, and they were on their porches talking, strumming guitars, and singing. This was kind of romantic, but a little bit scary too. Our room cost $2. And we got a 10-cent box of crackers and a 10-cent can of potted meat and 2 5-cent soda pops. It was strange staying in a hotel for the first time. We could rest and clean up again. We got out pretty early next morning and found our way to the highway. Another truck driver came along soon and stopped and picked us up. They seemed to need the company while driving. He said we could ride, but we would have to say we were brother and sister if they questioned us at the state line. We would have to tell them I was 16 years old. We were not questioned at the state line, and we didn't have to lie. We were relieved to be across the state line and on our way again. We rode all the way across New Mexico with this truck driver, and he let us out at Lawrenceburg, New Mexico. This desert country was so different from East Texas. I was amazed at the difference. We walked on through Lawrenceburg and were on the highway that went to Safford, Arizona. Everyone seemed to be of Mexican descent. At the edge of town, we stopped and tried to thumb a ride. It was late afternoon, and we really wanted to get on into Arizona before nighttime. We waited about an hour, and it seemed lots longer. No one stopped for us. We were getting discouraged. A car passed, drove down the road about a mile, then turned around and came back. This happened 3 times, and we were getting a bit scared. We could see there was 6 Mexican men in this car. The next time they came by, they stopped and asked if we wanted to ride. We said no. But we were really scared now. We were on the roadside with no money to get a room for the night. Everyone was so different from the people we were used to. A man and his wife and 2 children were parked in an open area by the roadside, near where we were trying to hitch a ride. They were camping for the night and were cooking their evening meal on a campfire. The man came over and talked to us. He said we should get off the road, for it was dangerous for us at night. He asked us to join them and have supper with them. We could spend our night in an old car body there. He had been working in the mine and knew some of the truck drivers hauling ore and would get us a ride out of there in the morning. He said he and his little family were going home to Oklahoma. We did as he said we should, and next morning he did get us a ride with a truck driver. This truck driver left us at the Arizona state line. He wouldn't take us across the line. We walked into Franklin, Arizona, a small farming community near the Arizona state line. We went into a small store there and bought us a loaf of bread, 10 cents, a can of potted meat, 10 cents, and a jar of sandwich spread, 25 cents. This took most of our money. We asked the lady in the store if there was any cotton to pick there. She said to go down the dirt road from the store to a field. It belonged to Mr. Cross, and there was cotton there. We ate our lunch by the roadside, then went to get our job picking cotton. It was time to earn money. There were 6 people picking cotton there. One woman was over the field, and she just picked part-time. 3 other women and 2 men were picking. The 2 men were Dick and Tim Donaldson from Hitchita, New Mexico. They were trying to supplement the income from their small ranch. They were rather poor bachelors with a sister and an invalid brother they cared for. The sister was their pride and joy. The others in the field were never that close to us, and I don't even remember them. We corresponded with the Donaldsons for years. We went right to work picking cotton. Of course, they asked where we were from and where we were going. They thought it really was funny when we said we're from Texas and are on our way to the Mesa, Arizona Temple. They all laughed at that, but Dick and Tim had to know more. They were all LDS and certainly didn't think we were members of the church if we were from Texas. We finally convinced them. Dick and Tim tried to keep up with Ernest and me in picking cotton, but we would run off and leave them. Ernest could really gather it in, and I was close behind him. I was usually 7 to 10 pounds lower than him when we went to the scales. Dick and Tim couldn't understand how we gathered it in so fast. It was really good cotton and weighed heavy. Mr. Crotch let us sleep in a shed room just off his house. The children said the cat slept there, but it was a bed. I helped his wife some with the children. One day Mrs. Crotch hired me to help her with the laundry. Mr. Crotch had Ernest help him with something outside. Both of us were glad to get back to the field. We could make more picking cotton than we could helping them. We picked there as long as there was anything on the cotton stalks. When we were finished, we had saved $28. Dick and Tim didn't want us to get on the road again hitchhiking, but we felt we must go on. They talked us into going to visit relatives of theirs in Verdun, New Mexico. After we visited there, we found a field and picked cotton for 2 days. We slept in a grain bin on our cotton sacks with a quilt to cover us. That grain was sure cold under our cotton sacks. A man who stopped by there asked us to go do ranch work for him as long as we wished to, with a house furnished and all the beef we needed to eat. Dick and Tim advised us against it because we did not know what type man he was. They said, "Come on with us to Lordsburg. Maybe we can find you a car." They were on their way home and didn't want to leave us on the roadside. They must have been our guardian angels. I didn't think we could buy a car for the $28 we had, but we went along with Dick and Tim. They drove us to a car lot where Ernest looked around. Of course, everything was too high for us. Then they showed him a little car at the side of the building, a 1927 Chevrolet with an Erskine body. It's the only time I ever heard of an Erskine. But it was an all-metal body, and it was better and looked better than a 1927 Chevrolet body. They were asking $25 for it, but somehow Ernest talked them into selling it for $20. We were excited to have a car to travel in and money left over to buy gas, $8. Dick and Tim were not afraid for us to go now. We said our goodbyes and left them. They were going home to Hachita. We were on our way to Mesa. We stopped in Franklin to show our car to the Crotch family. They were impressed that we had saved and bought a car and weren't bumming around anymore. Mr. Crotch's brother had called us bums one day and really upset Dick and Tim. The Crotches asked us to stay and work for them, but we declined. At Duncan, we had to stop at the inspection station for agricultural purposes so as not to bring worms, bugs, and boll weevils into Arizona. They were really strict then and did a real thorough inspection. They checked everything out. We drove on through the mountains to Safford and on to Pima. We spent the night in a motel in Pima for $1. Next day we found more cotton to pick and met Millie Bodine, who was once my dad's girlfriend. Millie told us that John and Pearl Denton lived at Fort Thomas. When we visited them, they asked us to stay a few days with them, $1 a day for room and board. Of course, the food was very conservative. We picked cotton here for 2 weeks. One man had a small field of real good cotton. We picked all of it. He was very pleased with our work, how clean we picked the field, and the cotton had no leaves or burrs in it. He said if we ever came back to pick cotton again, we should stop there. John Denton was some character. People called him Okra Denton, he said, because he was the first to plant okra in the area. Said he planted it in the fields with the cotton. Aunt Pearl was a meek sort of lady who had worked hard all her life to raise a large family. She still worked hard. John was rather overbearing to her and the children. We visited their married children and enjoyed it very much. It was good to visit with cousins I had never seen before. Aunt Pearl and her 4 children showed us some of the sights in the area. When we picked all of the cotton there, we started for Mesa. We saw Indians in Fort Thomas area. Some of the men had long braids, and the women and girls wore long, full skirts that looked like they were made of satin or velvet. It was a strange sight for me, for I had never seen Indians in their villages before. They lived in hogans. They wouldn't let you take their picture. They would go in the hogans or behind them. It was interesting. The trip on to Mesa was very interesting. I had never in my life seen mountains. These were mountains. It was beautiful, but I was so afraid. I've always been afraid in high places. But with Ernest driving, I decided I wouldn't worry. I would just enjoy the sights. Crossing over the big Roosevelt Dam was one of the highlights of our trip. I had never imagined anything like that. I had only seen them dam up a little creek to baptize someone. This was a learning time. Before we got to Globe in Miami, we went through a long tunnel. It went through part of the mountain. It was a great surprise to me. I couldn't imagine a highway through a mountain. This was a very exciting experience, but I was really scared as we started down the mountain and I could see cars on 3 roads below us. Ernest said to me, "We go there." I was still 15 years old and I was surely seeing the world. Then in Globe in Miami, all the houses built on the mountainside was shocking. At the mines, the molten stuff they dumped from the railroad cars ran down the ramps red hot. I was amazed at the sights. We soon got out of the mountains and were in desert country. It was a relief to see level ground again. As we drove into the Mesa city limits, we saw the Mesa Temple, and what a beautiful sight to us. It was such a sacred building. This was what we had been working and traveling for. There were citrus groves around it. I had never seen citrus fruit grow and had only eaten oranges a few times when Dad had bought each of us one for Christmas. It was so beautiful there. Now, in 1991, the citrus groves are gone and the tunnel and the temple is surrounded by city. When we got to Mesa, we got a motel, $1 to spend the night. We went to the post office next morning to check general delivery mail, hoping our temple recommends would be there. We went there several times that day and got nothing. We went to the temple and enjoyed going around the grounds. It was beautiful and peaceful. We knew we couldn't stay longer at the motel because of our financial situation. We drove to Phoenix and looked up Ernest's cousin, Mabel Robles. She let us stay with her a couple of days, then found a place for us to pick cotton at Buckeye, Arizona. I'm sure she was glad to get rid of us, and she should be. There were acres and acres of cotton and at least 100 cotton picker shacks. It was set up for major cotton crews to pick. There were grills on the outside for cooking. We got a job and moved in. There was a cot to sleep on. It was hot in daytime and cold at night. In the early mornings, our hands would get so cold trying to pick that cotton, and the burrs would prick our fingers until they'd bleed. Our hands cracked open and were so sore. We used glycerin and mineral oil to rub on our hands, and our hands wouldn't turn the cotton loose then. It was like fighting a losing battle. We hadn't got to do the thing we came for. And we learned after we got back home to Texas that our temple recommends had been sent to the temple and were there all the time. But we were discouraged and homesick, and it looked like we were not gaining with our savings. We only had $5. We picked cotton for a week. We wrote Ernest folks and asked them to send us $5 so we could go home. While we waited, we continued to pick cotton so we would not spend the money we had saved. So the money came. We packed our few belongings in our little car and headed for home. We stopped one more time at the Mesa Temple. It was so beautiful. As we pulled out and started home again, we stopped at a gas station and filled up with gas. We had $8 left to go to Gilmer, Texas. A man there asked us where we were going. We told him, and he asked if he could ride. He was going home to Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. He had no money, but had an electric razor he would sell to help with the gas. Ernest let him ride. We were so happy. It was such a beautiful feeling to know we were going home to Texas. It had started to rain, and it rained all the way through the mountains from Mesa to Safford. Ernest didn't mind. He liked driving in the rain. We drove on and on, only stopping to get gas. Gas was 10 to 15 cents a gallon. Our little car did great. The windshield wipers even worked. We had gotten deep into Texas before our rider decided to sell his electric razor, but he finally did it. We got a tank of gas and 2.5 out of his sale. At Dallas, he got out to take another road to the highway to his home, and we went on US 80 till we got to the road going to Gilmer, then on to Enoch and Kelsey. We were home for Christmas, 1938, and enjoyed seeing everyone. But there was no place for us to live, no work to be had. With no work, there was no money to buy food or gas. Ernest picked up a little job here and there. He worked a little for his dad as a carpenter helper, but was let go. Jim Starks, the son-in-law, and Ansel Hamberlin, Jim's son-in-law, were kept on because Jim had children and Eva, Ansel's wife, was expecting a baby. Ernest cut and delivered firewood, anything he could find to do. It was early in 1939 when Dad found a little frame house and an acre of land for sale in the Latch area. The house was a 2-room house with no partition in it. There was no ceiling and no inside walls. It looked good from the outside. We liked it and liked the idea of having our own home. Even though there was no outdoor toilet or no water well, we moved in. The cost of it was $40. We could pay $5 down and $2.50 per month. We felt we would have no problem with paying for it. But we were far from any of the family, and it took gas to go anywhere. The few jobs Ernest got wasn't enough to keep us going. We paid $2.50 a month on our little house and ate from the jars of canned stuff Velda had helped me can the summer we lived with them. There was green beans, tomatoes, chow-chow, wild plums, and a very little plum jelly. We bought flour, salt, lard, beans, and a little sugar and soap. I made biscuits and gravy every day for a long time, or I made water gravy when we were tired of tomato gravy, and we had chow-chow to eat with it. The green beans were surely good. Somehow we made it from day to day. When we found we couldn't make the $2.50 per month payment on our little house, we let the man have it back and moved to a house in the Enoch area. We were closer to family in town, just in case Ernest got work. One time we hoed and raked the Enoch cemetery for $15, enough to pay our bill at the store and have $5 left. I do wonder how we made it on the little Ernest brought in, but we did. That's all I've got. In September 1939, Ernest and I decided to make our second try at going to the temple. We had sold our little car to Binion in the spring because we couldn't license it, put tires on it, and buy gas for it. He offered to sell it back to us, but we had no money. We had a young heifer that Dad had given us when we got married. Binion said he would trade the car for the heifer. We did it. We got everything in order, packed the things we would take in the car, left the things we weren't taking with the family, and started out. This was much better than hitchhiking. Doris Simmons Cope was riding with us for $12 to Safford, Arizona. We drove all night. Ernest got so sleepy he couldn't drive. He asked Doris if she could drive, and she said she could, and he let her under the steering wheel for a few minutes. We found that she could not drive, but it waked him up for a while so he could drive. Between El Paso and Lordsburg, New Mexico, Ernest was too sleepy to drive anymore. He let me steer the car from my seat in the middle while he worked the gas pedal. I had never driven before. He'd surely not let me under the wheel. We went many miles this way. Sometimes I had to wake him to push harder on the gas pedal. I can now see how dangerous this arrangement was, but we were protected. Ernest finally woke up enough to drive. He let Doris out in Safford. She was anxious for us to go and not wait to meet her husband's relatives. Ernest grew up with her husband, but we were anxious to be on our way. We would try to pick cotton in Pima now. We stopped at Uncle John and Aunt Pearl Denton's. He told us that the man we picked for in 1938 had no cotton left to pick. Later, we learned he had wanted us. Uncle John and his boys were picking in a large field. We spent a few nights at his house and went with them. The cotton was as tall as we were and hard to pick. It was difficult, but we tried real hard to get enough to make it worthwhile. We only picked a few days before I got a real severe stomach cramps and diarrhea. I hurt so much I couldn't do anything. Stand, sit, walk, lay down, nothing. When I had diarrhea, I had to go in the cotton where it was all picked. I was so miserable. While we lived in the little house in Latch, I had a spell like that, and we decided I should take Epsom salts. Later in the day, the cramping stopped as quickly as it started, but my stomach was real sore to touch. A lady in the cotton field said I should not take Epsom salts while I had such stomach cramps. It could be appendicitis. Ernest finally decided he should take me to the hospital in Safford. The doctor said I had appendicitis and other things. He would do an appendectomy and check for any female disorders while I was in surgery. How could we ever pay the bill picking cotton, for I couldn't pick now? we were told that a fund was set up for the care of transient workers in Arizona, some sort of farmers' group insurance. It paid all but $2 of my hospital and doctor bill. I was in the hospital for a week and had to be very careful afterwards. The doctor had made an incision from a navel to 4 inches long. I always felt he was using me to learn more about the human body. He did remove a very inflamed appendix before it ruptured, and found everything else in a healthy condition. We were grateful to those who cared for me, and especially grateful to our Heavenly Father for His care and guidance at this time. Things could have turned out very differently if I hadn't gone to the hospital. The convalescence period was long, and Ernest wasn't doing well in the cotton field. He needed me out there for moral support. I didn't know I was worth so much. We spent a few days with Millie Bodine and her family before going on to Mesa. She was really a sweet person. Her husband and children were nice, too. One night she took me and her daughters to a movie. Before we went, she told her husband where he should sleep and where Ernest should sleep. Somehow they got mixed up and got in the wrong beds. When we got home, she got ready for bed, and as she got in bed, Ernest, who was still awake, cleared his throat. Millie reached over to touch her husband's bald head and found a full head of hair. Ernest said she got out of there real fast. Ernest had hoped I would get into bed with Brother Bodine and be embarrassed. We had a big laugh about it. I'm sure it was the bed he was used to sleeping in. He went to bed in his own bed. We went to Mesa to pick cotton. I still must be careful. We picked a few days and lived in a cotton picker's shack. Then my dad and Uncle Neri Bailey came from Kelsey. Dad was on his way to his family in Salt Lake City. We picked cotton. He picked cotton with us for a week. He tried, but he was pretty slow. We had to drive back to Safford for the doctor to check me. Dad went to visit with John and Pearl Denton and the Bodine family. He hadn't seen them for years. It was a nice trip, and when we got back to Mesa, Dad left for Salt Lake City. He could see that he was not getting anywhere picking cotton. We picked cotton as long as there was any to pick. With the cotton all finished, things were getting a little rough for us. Jim and Ida Starks had moved to Mesa and lived on Chandler Road. There was a tent and a carport in their backyard. They let us move in it. We lived there a month. The Fund for Transient Workers gave us commodities to help us survive. We got citrus fruit, lettuce, carrots, and cabbage from the packing sheds. It was culls from packing to ship and sell. We worked where we could and made it all right. There wasn't enough work for all the people who came to Arizona. Here the transient workers were referred to as Okies, Arkies, and Texans, not too kindly. All kinds of people came from these states because of the Depression to try to make a living for their family. Ernest and I finally made it to the temple December the 20th, 1939. Jim and Ida went with us for our special day. This was so strange to us, we had no idea what to expect. We got our endowments and were sealed for time and eternity. This was so special. Jim and Ida were the witness couple in this session. President Charles R. Jones and Sister Jones, his wife, were so special to us. They were like angels. He performed the sealing. She was so sweet to me. She had beautiful red hair. December 21st, we went for another session. President Jones then gave us our patriarchal blessings. We had finally done what we started out to do in August 1938. We were so happy with our lives right now. we were not happy that we had no work to pay our living expenses. Then, many of my family were in Utah, Dad, Mother, and boys, and Rogers and Signet and family, and Roy and Lacolian and family, and Raleigh and Barbara and family, and they suggested we move there. Raleigh and Barbara even sent us money to make the trip. We packed our few belongings and moved to Utah in March 1942.